I'm very happy that I have the opportunity to talk about this large cluster that Kevin was talking about, and one outcome that we had that we just published. It is a very different approach, I think, compared to the one that you just heard as a presentation, but I think it adds very nicely in a complementary way, so it opens up a great space for discussion later. So what I am going to talk about is the Hamburg Climate Futures Outlook, and it's called Hamburg Outlook because it's produced in Hamburg, but it's not a local outlook, but it's really a global assessment. At least that's our aspiration level. And it's called Climate Futures because we want to look in a combined way about how the climate changes and how society changes with it. It's not a deterministic relationship, but we want to look at the co-evolution of both. And what do we assess? We try to assess the plausibility of specific climate future scenarios. We think it's a very interesting way of asking the question about climate futures. So what I will talk about today in another 8 minutes is how we asked the specific question, what kind of scenario we looked at. So we asked the question about the plausibility of keeping the 1.5 degree limit to global warming. So a very specific climate future, that the Paris climate goals are achieved, that we keep the temperature limit and the emission goals. And we looked in the outlook, we looked at the combination of social drivers and physical processes, but I will stick today with the social drivers. So it's a large group of more than 60 authors who have worked together on this outlook, and it's open access, so you can download it here. So now this is the one climate future scenario that we try to look at. It's, as you see, it's very broad and very generic. It somehow represents a world in which the Paris climate goals have been achieved, and we translate this into the achievement of deep decarbonization by 2050. So in order to stick within the 1.5 degree global warming, we need to achieve somehow on a global level a deep decarbonization. We don't go into technical details what this means, but really a net zero society. We assume that this requires a deep transformational change of society, and of course it's very difficult to foresee or to talk about the plausibility of 40 years to 30 years of change, but we translate that sort of backwards in a scenario which is we look specifically at this decade, because we assume that if we want to achieve deep decarbonization by 2050, due to the long innovation cycles and the infrastructural change that is needed, we need to achieve a lot of the changes in this decade. So that's what we try to look at. How far are we with this change? Can we see that we are moving towards achieving this goal? So how do we assess that? The social plausibility of climate change. We have determined a set of 10 drivers, social drivers, that we think are key for this specific scenario, reaching deep decarbonization by 2050. And so here is, the link a little bit to the societal or socio-economic pathways, only that it's still very rough, and it's not just one or two sets of drivers, but it looks at a lot of processes in the political world, economic world, social actors, social movements, and so on. So normally when you try to understand how far are we in the process of deep decarbonization, you get a lot of positive signals. For example, you can observe that climate regulation takes place. We have seen in some cases that after COVID-19, the economic recovery programs have really tried to build back better and in a climate-friendly way. We have sometimes very strong social movements pressing for more dramatic climate mitigation policies. We have all kinds of institutional investors who announce their divestment decisions. We have consumers who look for climate-friendly products, and so on. We have corporations announcing all kinds of climate neutrality goals. So you see all this, but what we try to come to is a more realistic assessment of what's really going on and how far we are, other than wishful thinking and really coming up with a positive, with an over-optimistic estimation. So we came to the conclusion, and I'm happy to talk about that in more detail in the discussion, that with all the theoretical background that we assume for the individual drivers, and looking, holding available empirical evidence against these theoretical models of driver change, that as of now, with the changes that we see, meeting the 1.5 Paris Agreement temperature goal is not plausible. So some of the drivers support deep decarbonization, but not as quickly and as deeply enough as it would be necessary to really get there. And the driver corporate responses and consumption pattern are even really hindering the change towards deep decarbonization. So I'm skipping part of this, and here is sort of an overview, and you will find this in the Outlook, where we summarize all the results of the individual drivers and also the physical processes that I'm not talking about today. So the last question is, okay, how can we come from this kind of realistic assessment of the plausibility of this desirable future to really supporting desirable futures? How can we identify ways to strengthen this? And we always look at the social drivers and their enabling and constraining conditions. And we also try to show how they work together. And this is one way of thinking about how the interactions between the different social drivers can slowly build up what we call a global opportunity structure, with a densification of instances, repertoires that can be used for strategic action by actors that are trying to promote climate mitigation policies. And then you can see, for example, as of tonight, we had read the news that NGOs file complaints against BNP Paribas, for example, the bank, and they you have a social movement, you have the investors, and you have social movements using the legal climate litigation options to build up cases, and then other drivers can build on that. And so you can have a really densification of all these dynamics building on each other. That's one way of thinking in a positive and constructive way on how actors can use this type of framework to go towards to move closer towards this desirable future that the world achieves the Paris climate agreements. I think that's enough for the discussion, and I'll stop here and hand back to Kevin. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.